And we're inviting all of the 100 and I believe 89 countries in the United Nations to come out and be representative to the event and to share food, idea, dance, music, and we really want to show the diversity in the borough. We've been joined by the coolest councilman going. Councilman Jamani Williams has just walked into the door. Thank you, Councilman Williams. As the summer keeps rolling along, please keep us informed of block parties, any events in your area, your community. Try to crisscross the borough as much as possible. And our goal is to make sure that we visit the entire borough and communicate with the various communities from the 18 community boards and a large number of different neighborhoods. So reach out and let us know. We would like to be very much a part of the things that are happening in the borough of Brooklyn. I would like to have the minutes of the June 2014 Borough Board meeting read. Are you going to read them, Andrew?
They've been passed out. Copies of the minutes were sent out in advance. Does anyone have any corrections for the minutes?
Last name is spelled K-O-L-L-O-C-K rather than A-C-K.
Okay. We'll make that correction. Thank you.
I like that. People used to spell my name A-D-A-M after the family on TV. And I said, no, it's with an S. Is there a motion to adopt the minutes from the June 2014 Borough Board meeting?
Motion to adopt?
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great, no opposed. Tonight's first agenda item is a presentation on the mayor's housing plan. Commissioner Vicki Ben is of the Department of Housing Preservation and Development. She's here with us tonight, and she will present and will be available to take questions from the Borough Board members. Welcome, Commissioner. You can sit right where you are and do your great presentation. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, Borough President Adams, and all of you. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you about the mayor's housing plan. And so what I thought I would do is just tell you a little bit about the background of the plan and some of the key tenets, and then stop at any point to answer questions. So please, just let me know if you have questions or comments, but certainly I will leave, I hope, plenty of time to answer any questions or take any suggestions that you may have, because the plan is very much a living plan that changes as we get more information, as we see more problems that need attention, and as we get more ideas and suggestions about what we could be doing. So there we go. As many of you know, when Mayor, then candidate de Blasio was on the campaign trail, he called for the city to produce or preserve 200,000 units of affordable housing. And so he charged the Deputy Mayor Glenn and all of her team with coming up for a plan to do that once he was elected. And so the plan that I'll be talking about is what we came up with, working very closely with the mayor and really working across many agencies to try to figure out what was the best, most efficient, most fair way of producing or preserving 200,000 units of housing. This is small type, so let me just say I think one of the remarkable things about the housing plan is that in the past, the housing plan really came from HPD. HPD, of course, is the lead housing agency, but we're not the only ones concerned with housing. And the deputy mayor made very clear that this wasn't just a housing plan. This was a plan about how we're going to work with neighborhoods across the city to bring housing, but also to bring infrastructure, schools, all of the things that make a neighborhood, so that we weren't just going to be focused on putting a building in or putting housing in, but really using our investments to try to help neighborhoods achieve whatever it is that they value and their vision. So the deputy mayor brought together more than 200 stakeholders from all around the city, from affordable housing groups to nonprofits to market rate developers to supportive housing developers to tenants' rights advocates, to really the full range of people who care about our neighborhoods. The deputy mayor also brought to the table 13 different agencies, everyone from the usual suspects, the Department of City Planning, and HPD and our finance arm, HDC, but also the Department of Aging, the Department of Buildings, the Small Business Services, the Office for People with Disabilities. Really, everybody was at the table working together on the plan. And I think that the great thing about the plan is that it's owned by all those different agencies. They all feel like they have an obligation to work together to produce and preserve 200,000 units, but to do it in a way that helps neighborhoods, as I said. Where we started is it's important, I think, to really figure out what is the problem before you try to figure out a solution so that your solution ideally matches your problem. This is too small a print, so I'm gonna go to the slides that make the same points. The first part of the problem, and I think one of the central tenets of the plan, is that the problem of housing affordability is really two-pronged. It's partly a feature of the fact that rents are going up at a pretty good clip, but it's also a function of the fact that wages have been stagnant or in some cases have declined. So this chart shows you that in a healthy market, you'd have that blue line, the median renter income, up above the median gross rent, and you'd have it steadily up above. But instead, what you see is that the median renter income plunged just as gross rents are going up. And so you get this very unhealthy decrease in wages at the same time that you see an increase in rents. And so the lesson that we took from that is a housing plan has to be not just about housing, but also about jobs, because we can build and preserve housing until the cows come home, but if people don't have the kind of incomes needed to support natural increases in rents, we're not making any headway. So it has to be both a job strategy and a housing strategy. This picture really shows one of the main problems that we're fighting against, and that is families paying too much of their income for housing, right? And when they pay too much of their income towards housing, they don't have money to send their kids to school, to send their kids to after school or pre-K, or to buy the medicine that they need, to do all of those things that they need. And so what this picture shows is that dark orange is people paying more than 30% of their income in rent, which is what HUD considers to be starting to be unaffordable. And then the light orange is people paying more than 50% of their income in rent, which is a very unhealthy situation, obviously. And one of the frightening things is not just the sheer number of those families and those households, but the fact that it's increasing, and you see a pretty big increase between 2000 and 2012. Part of the problem is we just haven't produced enough housing. So if you look at your left, you see starting in the 1990s, we were seeing very little production of housing through the early 90s, less than 7,000 units a year. And it was really only in the late 90s and early 2000s that you started to see healthy rates of production. And then, of course, you see that drop off the cliff in 2008, 2009. Now, one of the remarkable things about that is where you see on that left-hand side those low production levels during the 90s, we were actually gaining 1 million people in that decade. But we were only building 7,000 units of housing on average during the whole decade. So we built 70,000 units and we got 1 million people. That is a housing crisis. And that's the beginning of the housing crisis, which we're still really responding to. I think this is the most telling and most depressing of pictures. The orange on, I'm still confused, your left, sorry. The orange on your left is the number of households that meet the HUD, the Housing and Urban Development definition of either very low income or extremely low income. So extremely low income is a family of 4 making about $25,000 a year. Very low income is a family of 4 making about $70,000 a year. And we have about 1 million of those households. If you take the number of housing units, apartments, homes, et cetera, condos, co-ops, and you look at how many of them are affordable for people making those incomes, you get about 425,000 units for 1 million households. So again, that's a crisis, right? When you've got twice as many households needing units at a particular price range as you do houses in that price range, you've got a problem. And of course, the problem is actually even worse because some of those 425,000 units are occupied by people who are making more money than the people with in the orange bar. And so they're really not all available, even that small number available to those families that need them. And then of course, in addition to all that, luckily, New York continues to get better and we continue to attract people like me from Colorado or the Midwest or Argentina, like my husband, or all over the world and all over the United States. And we need places for those folks. So from that analysis of the problem, we identified really some key tenets. So the first of the key tenets is that any housing plan has to address the city's changing demographics and expand the range of who's served by affordable housing. So that's really 2 different issues, and let me address them separately. The first is that our families are changing. Many more of our households are 1-person households, right? As people age, as people take longer to marry, to form households, we just have a lot more single-member households. And we don't have a housing stock that responds to the needs of those senior citizens or that's responsive to the needs of those single-person households. But the second problem is that while we've targeted a great many of our affordable housing units at basically what's considered 60% of AMI, because that's the target group for the low-income housing tax credit program, the families that are that 30, 40, 50% of AMI, so the family earning $25,000 for a family of 4, those families are not being served. And at the same time, the middle income families, the policeman married to a teacher, I've never met that couple, but I understand they exist. Those middle income people also are being priced out of New York City. And so we need to both reach deeper into the income levels, and we need to reach higher into the income levels in what we do. The second basic conclusion that we reached is that we really have to revamp our land use processes. It can't be that all we care about is putting a building with housing. We have to have a more neighborhood approach. We have to understand and work with communities to realize that housing requires schools, it requires retail, it requires community facilities, it requires houses of worship, it requires transit, it requires all those things that make a neighborhood, right? And that we should not be just about putting housing somewhere. We should be about building neighborhoods. And so we really committed to work with neighborhoods in a different way, to coordinate among ourselves so that if we're bringing housing, we're talking to the School Construction Authority, we're talking to DOT, we're talking to the MTA, and we're trying to bring it all at the same time rather than, promises that it will come in the future. The third tenet is that we really need to make economic diversity a cornerstone of housing development, so that when we're working with a neighborhood, if a neighborhood has a predominance of middle income and high income families, then that's a neighborhood in which we need to bring more of the lowest income families. If we're working with a neighborhood that has a concentration of poverty, then what it may need is not perhaps many more of the very lowest income housing units, but it may need more of those moderate income, middle income families that can help diversify and bring different kinds of retail, et cetera, to the neighborhood. We realize that we're part of the problem, that sometimes our programs, our reviews, our permitting processes contribute to the cost of housing, and we committed to clean up our own act and really work to make the agencies work together, and also to make within an agency to make our programs more streamlined, more efficient, and more fair. We realize that first and foremost, we have to preserve what's there. People live in housing that's already there. They want to stay there. They want to stay in those neighborhoods. They don't want to be driven out. And we have to preserve both the quality and the affordability of that existing stock. Of course, tied to that is that we're losing a great many of our rent-regulated units that are so important to the affordability of housing in the city, and that we have to protect that stock. We realize that we have limited time to do this. We have very favorable markets, we have favorable interest rates, and we have to move quickly and get this done before we get another market cycle. And we realize that we have to leverage private resources, we have to leverage state and federal dollars, but we also have to put a lot of our own money on the table. And the mayor committed immediately. He doubled the capital budget that we had to spend on housing for the next 4 years, and committed to put about $8.2 billion of city funds, both capital dollars and our HDC money, directly on the table to leverage those state, federal, and private resources. So from all of those basic tenets, we really adopted 5 basic strategies. One is, again, to start, we're going to take a neighborhood approach rather than a building approach. We're going to work proactively with neighborhoods to try to make sure that the housing, that all that we're doing is serving the neighborhood's interests for diverse and livable neighborhoods. The second, as I said, preserving what we have is key, and we're going to preserve both the affordability and the quality of the existing housing stock. We're going to build about 8,000 new units a year of brand new affordable housing. We're going to work across both preservation and new construction to provide that critical senior housing, as well as housing for the formerly homeless and housing for those in need of supportive services. And that we're going to have to be refining all of our tools and our tax incentive programs, et cetera, to make them more efficient and more effective in doing that. So I can talk about strategies under each of these categories, but I'd really rather get to some of the punchline here, and then take your questions, because I really want to hear from you. So we committed to 200,000 units. I'm happy to say that as of today, we have 8,722 of those financed as of late last night. So that's a start. We realize there's a lot more to be done, but that's our 6 months in start. As I said, we've committed to city investment of about $8.2 billion. The total expected cost, and so the contribution that this is making to jobs, to your local economy, will be about $41.1 billion over the 10-year plan. 60% of what we do will be preservation, 40% will be new construction. We're going to quadruple the number of units aimed at those very lowest income families, and we're going to increase by 50% the number of units aimed at those middle income units that I talked about. So that's expanding the range, as I mentioned. So those are the key features of the plan. There are all kinds of new programs, and I'm happy to talk about any of those, but but I'd really prefer to hear from you if that's okay.
Yes. Thank you very much, Commissioner. We were also joined by Councilman Dr. Eugene. Thank you for joining us, Councilman. I would like to open the floor up to my councilmatic colleagues if there's any questions you want to ask before I do so. Councilman Williams is the chair of housing in the city council. So Councilman Williams, are there any questions you want to ask at this time?
I'll just make a comment. I've commented on the plan early on, and I think it's a very good framework. A couple of things that I might have tweaked here and there, but basically I thought it was a pretty good framework. And we're going to have a hearing on the plan itself. I think in September, I think is when we're looking at. So we're going to have hopefully everyone there who doesn't have their questions answered will come out then as well. But we'll have a lot more questions then. And I think we've been saying as we get to the more specifics, projects and neighborhood by neighborhood, then even more questions will be coming out.
Thank you, Councilman Doris.
Thank you, Borough President. First, I want to acknowledge my two colleagues, the second and the third coolest council members. Thank you. You mentioned senior housing, and I did mention before the hearing that you have about 1,000 senior citizens that go to homeless shelters.
Right.
So if we could pull them out from the homeless shelters and not call it homeless shelters and call it senior housing, I think that's a start to, put those senior citizens in a place where it's maybe a lot safer. And also, how do you identify the different areas where you're going to be building these affordable housing? Mm-hmm. Is it through developers? Is it vacant land? How do you do that?
Okay, so let me address your first question. And first of all, just to say, I'm delighted to have Councilmember Williams as the chair of the Housing Committee, and it's really a delight to work with him and all of the City Council. On the senior housing, so one of the toughest issues about senior housing, and it really comes into fore when we talk about those 1,000 seniors who are in homeless shelters, is of course they often have very little income and have no prospect that their income is going to increase, obviously. And so that's been an area where we have traditionally relied on HUD fundings, what we call Section 202 funding for senior citizens, and vouchers, Section 8 vouchers, which we can then use on a project basis in a particular building for senior citizens. Both of those have been drastically cut. We are working hard with our partners in Washington to try to get increases there, and we're trying very hard to find new sources of that continual rental subsidy, right? So that's really the issue, is we have the money, the capital dollars to build the buildings, but we also need the monthly rental subsidy that goes in there. One of the things that we're exploring is when we use inclusionary zoning, to have inclusionary zoning include some of both the capital dollars that are needed to build the units, but also the monthly subsidy that's required, especially for those senior citizens. So we're exploring a range of what I hope will be creative financing like that. We're also looking to use some Medicaid redesign money because you're saving money by keeping seniors in good housing. You're saving emergency room dollars and healthcare dollars, so we're looking to leverage some of that. So we're really looking under every stone to try to find money for those rental subsidies that have to go along, right? But especially on the senior citizens in the homeless units, we're working very hard on two fronts. One is to identify, keep track of, monitor over time the units that are dedicated to formerly homeless. And the second is to reduce the amount of time it takes to move somebody from shelter into permanent housing. We had a sort of redesign group that mapped out every stage that you had to go through. It was something like 334 days, 17 different sets of papers. We're working as a team to try to reduce that so that we can get people in there, out of homeless shelters, into permanent housing much faster, especially those seniors. Okay, so your second question, how are we identifying the areas that we might build? So the first thing is that the Department of City Planning, and we're lucky to have Anna here representing the Department of City Planning, but Department of City Planning, working with the other agencies, but clearly taking the lead, is working to identify some areas that might be appropriate for rezonings, for upzonings in general, that could create some capacity that doesn't now exist. At the same time, we're looking at every neighborhood. We're doing a vacant property, underused lands, underused building survey, looking at every assemblage possibility, every possibility of an existing piece of property that might be used. And we're going out and asking everybody, all of you all and everybody, tell us about opportunities in your neighborhood, tell us where housing could help solve an eyesore, let us know where we might be of help in bringing affordable housing or housing in general that could contribute to your neighborhoods.
So if, Commissioner, so if I identify in my district a vacant land and you build housing there, so is that once the housing would be built, would that be from people from that neighborhood? Because otherwise, if we start mixing up areas, neighborhoods, you're taking away children from schools, you're taking away people from their friends, from their families. Mm-hmm. So if we identify something in a specific district, mm-hmm. Would the housing be utilized for the people that are needed?
So almost all of our housing comes with a 50% community preference. So all of our housing has to be by law, has to be distributed by lottery, but the first 50% comes from the people who live in the community. Now, many of you have told me we feel like our community residents don't qualify, they're over income, they're under income, all kinds of reasons, and we're really looking hard at that and trying to work with those community members to work on their credit rating, identify the sources of income that they might use so that they qualify for the housing. We're really trying to figure out how to make that community preference more robust.
Okay, because I have a very high poverty level in my district, mm-hmm. So this is according to statistics. Also, from the $8.2 billion, will money be going into Section 8 vouchers, and if yes, how much?
No, we do not. We cannot put money into Section 8 vouchers. Section 8 vouchers are a federal program, and they actually prohibit, we had a long conversation about this, they actually prohibit the city putting money into the voucher program itself. That said, we have several sort of voucher program wannabes where we model a privately funded program. So for example, we just started a privately funded voucher program for renter victims of Sandy who could not qualify for the federal dollars that were coming in there because of undocumented status. We got private money, a foundation to pay to design a voucher-like system, but it's not a Section 8 voucher.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
Dr. Eugene?
Thank you very much. Let me first take the opportunity to thank the Board President and the Commissioner for hosting this very important briefing. Thank you to both of you, and thank you to all the participants. I was going to ask some questions, but similar to the question asked by my colleague. But then let me ask them anyway. So my question would be, I know that housing is a big crisis in New York City. Mm-hmm. And all the district, council managed district or community board, all the areas need affordable housing. That's been my constituent, the constituent of my colleagues, all of us, we need affordable housing for our district. What is the formula? Are you going to ensure that there is an equitable distribution of the affordable housing? We don't have a high concentration of affordable housing in one area and a lack of affordable housing in another area. Mm-hmm. Number one. Number two, we know right now that we have we don't have too many land where to build. Are you going to balance, you know, to protect certain areas, the structure, the fabric of certain areas, while you are trying to build up? Of course, some of the areas you may have to change the zoning. But what is the formula? Or are you going to balance this challenge of protecting the fabric of certain areas, certain neighborhoods, at the same time build up housing? My last question would be, we all know that homelessness is higher within the veteran population. Do you have any plan to create or to give priorities also to our veterans, those brave men and women who put their life in danger for us, who made the utmost sacrifice for all of us, who are still homeless? What do you have for the veterans? Thank you.
Okay, so let me take your questions in order. The first question, just to remind myself, was, are you going to distribute, every neighborhood basically has a crisis, and are you going to be distributing the affordable housing in a more fair way, or to deal with the needs of all the different communities? And yes, we have a 5-borough strategy. Sometimes various boroughs or parts of the boroughs have not, have been neglected. We have a 5-borough strategy. We're trying very hard to look at every community to make sure that we're being responsive to the needs of each of those communities. If you think that we're neglecting you, any of you, let me know, and we will take a look at it, okay? So we are committed to that. The second question, how are we going to balance the need to identify land and perhaps develop it with more density against protecting the character and the current nature of the community? And not to be flippant, but I will say we're going to do that carefully and imperfectly, because as you know, it's a very difficult balance to reach. We're going to try very hard. And I want to emphasize that when we talk about bringing density to a community, we're not talking about putting a 20-story building next to a 2-story house, right? We're talking about density increases that may mean going from 4 stories to 6 stories, that may mean a little less of a side yard or a backyard, those kinds of things. So we're not talking about a sea change, right? But we recognize that people love their communities. People don't generally like change. On the other hand, people like the things that change brings, and sometimes you have to just take a leap of faith and work with us to try to make sure that the change brings the things that you want. That if I say to people, do you want more density in your community? Very few of them say yes. But if we talk about, do you want homes for your senior citizens? Do you want homes for your kids who are coming back from college or that kind of thing? Do you want more of the retail that comes along with higher density? Then they often say yes. So it's really a question of working with every neighborhood to try to identify what are the advantages that we can bring to the community along with the housing and the additional density. In terms of our veterans, absolutely, we commit in the plan to do New York City's part to end veteran homelessness, which is a disgrace. And we commit to fully work to end veterans homelessness in New York City. We work very hard through our supportive housing, through our set-asides for supportive housing, to bring veterans, to address the needs of veterans. So absolutely, they've served the country, we should serve them.
Thank you very much.
Sorry. So like I said, I don't want to ask too many questions because I know we're going to have the opportunity in September, and I want other people to ask. But I did have one question. There's a 200% increase in extremely low-income units and 50% increase in moderate-income units. What number is that in terms of 200,000? How many of the 200,000 is that?
I will get back to you. I forget those numbers. They're in the housing plan, but I just don't. Sorry. We'll get back to you. despite doing housing finance, I am terrible at remembering numbers, like my phone number and things like that, especially after smartphones erased that file from my brain. So my apologies, but we can get that number. It's in the housing plan, and we'll get it for you. Okay.
Thank you, Councilman. Commissioner, I think that all of the council people, as well as those throughout the city, I believe that housing is an issue that we hear no matter where we go. And as we start the process of addressing affordable housing, we don't want to leave any stone unturned. And probably one of the areas that is important to look at is how do we prepare our residents to be prepared if the possibilities come forth for affordable housing, such as the credit checks, making sure they know how to do the lottery system. And if you, I know you touched on it based on the question that was presented earlier, but are you open to do other services where we can team up with local clergies and others to sort of get people prepared when housing is available to move them forward into housing units?
Absolutely, that's a great idea, and we're delighted to work with faith-based organizations, any groups that are reaching out into the community and that can get the word out. One of the, I think, disturbing things is that there are many, many families who win the lottery. Their number comes up, but then they can't get the documentation, they can't pass the credit check, that kind of thing. So the first thing that we're doing there is that we're looking at each and every one of those criteria and asking, do they really need to be this tough? Do we need to have that high of a credit rating requirement? And we're going to be taking a very tough look at that. But then the second thing is, I'm really delighted. Last week we learned that the City Foundation is providing some funding for us to team up with the Office of Financial Empowerment, so that if a person enters the lottery, we will tell them then, if you should win the lottery, your credit rating will be checked. So now is the time to make sure it's accurate and to try to repair any problems in your credit rating. And here's some assistance to try to do that. So we're really going to be trying to work on a sort of case-by-case, identify the kinds of problems that people are facing, and try to hook them up with help on those issues. So, but absolutely, I'm willing to work with anyone.
Thank you. And just to follow up, and I'll get you one moment on Board 15. The next question I wanted to ask is dealing with tenant harassment and displacement. I just want to share with the board here that our council we're looking forward to partnering with the district attorney's office and local housing advocates to see how do we aggressively go after landlords who are harassing tenants and damaging property and doing other what I believe are criminal events. We want to see enforcement of some of the criminal sanctions that landlords who are habitual offenders are getting away with. And we're hoping that the district attorney's office partner with us on ensuring that these habitual offenders are prosecuted, not only civilly, because they've basically made the civil sanctions as the cost of doing business. And we think that needs to stop. And so we're hoping in the next few weeks we can get the district attorney to be on board with some of the initiatives that we would like to put forward. With that in mind, 80,000 new units are important, but we have 120,000 units of affordable units that we can't lose. What are some of our initiatives of protecting those units and not allowing them to leave the rows of affordable units?
So those are great points, and I'm not happy to say, but I'm because we shouldn't need to go this route. But I am pleased to report that 2 of our worst landlords were put in jail last week as a result of just continued and flagrant violations of the Housing Maintenance Code and their obligations as landlords. And we will be working very hard, and I really appreciate your efforts with the DA to make sure that they are brought to justice. But let me back up from that. I mean, as you know, part of the issue is where you have rent-regulated units, you've got a hot market, the temptation for some landlords to try to harass rent-regulated tenants out of the building is too much for some landlords to resist. And so we see these horrific instances of landlords basically knocking on your door saying there's a leak downstairs, I need to do some work in your kitchen while you're at work today, and the family comes home and finds out that the entire apartment has been knocked down. Really horrific stuff. And we're trying to work with the tenants advocates, to work with the DAs, to work with the Department of Buildings, Fire, et cetera, to identify those very early and stop that process at the beginning. We're working very hard to provide anti-eviction legal services and prevention services, and the City Council was very generous in funding more of that in this last budget round. I hope that will make a big difference. We will never have enough lawyers to deal with all of those problems, but I'm very hopeful that we will be able to make much more of a dent in the problem. We're also planning to work more efficiently and smarter with the housing court itself, so that we can say to the housing court, look, do you know that this landlord who's seeking to evict that tenant has 20 open violations on their building, right? Think about that as you're evaluating this case. So we're really trying to identify those kinds of techniques and those kinds of strategies, and trying to leave no tool unused. So any ideas, and any efforts like your effort with the DA are so important.
Thank you. I'm going to forego my questions so we can open the floor up to the members of the Borough Board. Community Board 15, I know you had a question.
You originally described the low-income units, families of 425,000 or less. What would it be the moderate income units?
So the moderate income units are 80 to 100% of AMI, and let me get my handy-dandy chart to tell you exactly what that means. Here it is. Okay, so a family of 4 making 80% of AMI would be about 67,000, up to 130% of AMI, which would be 109,000 for a family of 4. That would be considered moderate.
And when you say 60% preservation, that's on existing housing stock.
Exactly.
Has any of that been determined? Will it be certain buildings that are affordable right now?
Yes.
How are you going to preserve them with people living there?
So we have a great many buildings that we have put money into in the past that were subject to a regulatory agreement, and that regulatory agreement and the subsidy will eventually come to an end. We work very proactively to try to make sure that none of those buildings, what's called opts out of the program, leaves those subsidy programs and thereby escapes the affordability restrictions. So we try to give them the kind of money that they need to make the boiler repair, make the, fix the roof, all of those things that need to be done after 15 or 30 years, and keep them in the program for another 30, 40, 50 years. So that's first part of preservation. And any building that has received our financing in the past, we are proactively working to make sure that it stays in the program for a longer period of time. In addition, we do preservation for buildings that, for example, you know in many of your neighborhoods that during the heat of the market, many buildings were sold for way more than they were worth. And when those buildings were unable to get rid of as many rent-regulated tenants as they wanted to, those buildings started to fail. We have programs to try to get those buildings into affordability restrictions as well. And then the last piece of the puzzle is that we're really trying to broaden our preservation efforts to reach a lot of the small buildings that have traditionally been ignored. Half of our low-income renters live in small buildings, and yet those small buildings aren't part of any of our programs. So we'll be working with those small building owners to try to give energy retrofits, water bill, water conservation measures, boiler replacements, resiliency measures, all of those things to try to help them keep the place affordable in exchange for guarantees that they will only raise the rents by Rent Guidelines Board, or that they will keep it affordable for some period of time.
I'm sorry, I needed to just jump in really quickly because it was in the housing plan, and this is a polite nudge that we keep pushing, which is the repeal of ERSTAT, which would give us control over the rents, that would really help us preserve a lot of the rent-regulated units that are leaving. And I'm really trying to push the administration to take it on and champion it. So this is just a polite nudge again, that we can add that to the list of things when people ask the question of how we're going to preserve the units.
Yeah, I mean, I took your question to be preserving in the physical sense, but absolutely, we know that since 1994, about 930,000 units of rent-regulated housing have been lost, and we want that to stop.
And I just want to reiterate that there's no greater task that could have more of an impact on our housing crisis than the ERSTAT law. And there's an opportunity that if there's a change in Senate hands, that we can really finally bring down to the city our housing policies. Right now it's controlled by the northern part of the state, and I just think, Jumani, you're on point with that. We have to repeal the ERSTAT law to really have an impact on housing issues.
Hi. It was really wonderful to hear the part of your presentation where you talked about trying to develop affordable housing in high-income neighborhoods where property values are high, because I think a lot of the opposition that folks have to supportive and affordable housing development is that low-income communities bear the brunt of it, and it's not shared across the city. So even though it's expensive to develop in high-income neighborhoods, I think it's really important from an equity standpoint. But two things I didn't hear you discuss is what portion of the 200,000 units or the 80,000 new developed units will be supportive housing? What is the thinking of the plan on supportive housing? And then in terms of low-income home ownership, that's something that housing developments and cities and other parts of the country have really focused on, and for low-income people to really feel like they have a stake, a permanent stake in their neighborhoods. I'm curious of what the plan says about encouraging low-income home ownership.
Okay, thanks. So we are very committed to getting affordable housing built in those highest income neighborhoods, and as you have seen in some of the recent actions of the Department of City Planning, when developers have come and said we need some variance or we need a rezoning or whatever to build in those high value neighborhoods, high sales price neighborhoods, we've been insisting on mandatory inclusionary zoning. We've been insisting on affordable housing, and we'll continue to do that in those high-value neighborhoods. In terms of home, let's see, your second question has gone out of my head, but let me, supportive housing. Supportive housing, we have, this past year, we financed about 1,250 units of supportive housing. We're very much hoping to increase that even further. I can't totally commit to what the number would be because it depends very much on what comes out in terms of, much of our supportive housing is financed, the services part of it, as well as the physical part of it, is financed through agreements with the state, what's the so-called New York 1, New York 2, and New York 3 agreements. New York 3 has ended, and we are negotiating a new New York 4, or whatever it will be called, that will provide the financing for that. But we're very much hoping to see a further increase beyond even the 1,250 units, which, by the way, is double what it was just a few years ago. So we've doubled in the last year, and we hope to even increase that even further. In terms of low-income homeownership, we would like to see more low-income homeownership. We're not seeing the credit market, the mortgage market come along there. And so what we are finding is we just can't get those projects financed because the risk that there won't be mortgages for those families at the other end is too high right now. We are continuing to do home ownership through many of the buildings that we own, right, that we took through tax liens and other kinds of programs in the past, and we're continuing to try to use those for home ownership programs. We're looking for additional ways to build home ownership into the program, but we're pretty stymied by the lack of credit availability for the families that we would be serving. I hope that changes. We're looking for ways to push the envelope, but that's the reality.
Community board, you have a question?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Bean. I have two things. In CB1, we have two stagnant sites: the old Greenpoint Hospital site and the Pfizer site.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any plans to develop those areas? Also, my next thing is, do you have any plans to preserve the Mitchell-Lama program? Thank you.
Okay, let me take the last one first. When you say preserve the Mitchell-Lama program, the program ended a long time ago. There hasn't been any new money devoted to the Mitchell-Lama, to build new Mitchell-Lama housing in decades. There's talk in Albany about putting some money into reviving the financing under Mitchell-Lama, and we're totally excited about that. We'll see what happens. But we work to preserve every unit that's now in the program that's reaching the end of its regulatory agreement. We try very hard to keep every one of those Mitchell-Lama units in the program, and we'll continue to do so. In terms of your first question, I'm sorry, I didn't, Greenpoint Hospital and the Pfizer site. I do not know exactly what's going on with the Greenpoint Hospital site. I know that DCP, and I know that there are some discussions, but I don't know the details. In terms of the Pfizer site, my understanding is that that's a private site and that there are plans underway by the owner to develop that site, but I don't know the details.
Thank you.
Dr. Barnett, and then can you go second?
Thank you for your presentation. I'm all for affordable housing. And I guess my question is, because when you advertise affordable housing, the schools that are in the area where you're going to build these housing, they have to be up to par as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know how the two of them can fit together, because if you have affordable housing and the schools are not up to par, then some families may want to move out and not necessarily send their kids to those schools in the area. So I don't know if you've done any research. I don't know if housing and the DOE are talking in terms of how we can keep our kids in schools. I'm an educator by day, chairperson by night, and I'm always looking ways of how to make sure that the schools are doing what they're supposed to do as well.
So the mayor and his team are very strongly committed to, we are not putting housing without putting the additional things, the additional services and infrastructure that are needed to support that housing. And first on that list is schools, right? Both school capacity, so we shouldn't cause crowding. We shouldn't put in a building that causes the existing residents to feel like their schools are crowded. And whenever we invest in a community, we need to be investing in all of the aspects of that community, first and foremost schools. So we are working very closely with DOE, with the School Construction Authority, now with the pre-K. We're trying to identify first and second floor community facilities that could be used for pre-K. So we see those as inextricably intertwined.
Thank you.
Hi again, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, it was very informative. Regarding the 60% preservation, that includes factories. Is there a limit to size that you're looking to redevelop? 10 square feet, 50 square feet?
No, I mean, we're looking at, and part of the basic tenet of the plan is that we need to be looking at those small infill sites. We need to be looking at small buildings. You know, we need to look, you can build a 20-story building, and that's maybe a fast way, but it may not necessarily be what the community needs. And in many communities, there are, you know, second and third floors above the stores that aren't sufficiently used, that we need to be working with those owners. There's commercial space where you just have a, you know, a one-story commercial building where we could be putting housing above that commercial building. So we're looking at all of that, and especially those small vacant sites. We're actually, one of the things that that I'm very excited about that we just got from the state legislatures passed last week is that we have a program to try to bring in more of the minority and women-owned developers. We don't have enough minority and women-owned developers in our pipeline, and one of the issues there is that it's often hard for them to get experience on a range of building types, developing a range of building types so that they can bid on our request for proposals. And so we are dedicating a pipeline, including some of those smaller sites, so that those MWBE developers can get some experience in working with the city programs on those smaller sites, graduate up to a slightly bigger site, and then eventually really be competitive for the bigger jobs that we do. And so we're trying to identify a lot of those smaller sites exactly for that program, but also because we know, look, a vacant site that's made into a community garden, I love gardens, so I'm prejudiced, but you know, that can be an asset to the community. But a vacant lot that's just been sitting there vacant for a long time is not an asset. And we're working very hard to work with the Brownfields program to clean up a lot of those sites and to be able to put something that contributes to the community on them.
Great, thank you very much.
Yes.
I have a question that might not directly relate to this, but it has to do with density in certain neighborhoods where density may or may not be appropriate. One problem we've been having in our council district, Bay Ridge, that reflects best and first is problem with legal conversions, and how that might undermine any plans to sort of have a greater plan for affordable housing in the city. I was wondering if HPD, other city agencies like DOE, what they're doing to tackle that issue while simultaneously working on promoting density where it's appropriate.
So thank you. I mean, and I've heard, as I went around and met many of you, I heard so many of you have the problems with illegal conversions and illegal basement apartments. It's a very, very difficult problem, as you know, a problem to identify it early enough to stop it, much less to identify it later in a way that can be addressed. We are forming a task force with the fire department, the Department of Buildings, the police department, trying to use all kinds of data to help us identify early on where illegal conversions are taking place. We're also trying to come up with some new creative solutions. So for example, one of our nonprofit sort of policy and research groups, the Citizens Housing Planning Council, is doing a crowdsourcing, I need my teenagers to tell me what the right language is, but a crowdsourcing type of program where they're presenting the problem. One of the problems of trying to make those units legal and safe is that they need a second source of water in case of fire, right? But hooking up to the water main is a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 proposition. That's not realistic. So they're asking architects, engineers, inventors of all kinds, help us solve this problem. Help us come up with some solutions to this kind of problem. And they're getting answers like, you know, a small roof, you know, water tank that you'd put on just a one-family house like you have in a big apartment building that might be able to deal with the water pressure issue and the water issue in the event of a fire. So we're really trying to work across ways to identify all of the different problems that these illegal units cause and trying to come up with solutions about preventing them more rigorously, dealing with them once they're there, legalizing or making them safe where that might be an appropriate response, and yet understanding that if we legalize an illegal unit, first of all, we may encourage other people to do that, and second, we may just make it more expensive. They may kick out the tenant who's there now that it's legal, and make it a more expensive home. So it's a really, there are lots of knotty problems. I don't need to tell you all who have been dealing with that. We are trying to sit down, trying to learn from all of the task force and study commissions that have already taken place, and really trying to be more creative about ways to solve that problem. And I am delighted to work with any of you on those issues.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation. I'm pretty sure the board appreciate the thoroughness and the time that you've spent here this evening. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We are going to move to a presentation on community board planning, workshop for community boards by Land Use Director Richard Barrett.
So we're really here to offer services of the Borough President's office to the community boards to help the boards formulate their visions for whether it be rezoning of the neighborhoods or other aspects of using the land use process and zoning to make changes. Going to show you some slides we did recently for District 9. Dwayne's going to be seeing some of this for a second time. So some of the things we focused on with District 9, for example, so what is the neighborhood zoned for? A lot of people have no clue. They walk up and down their blocks. They really don't understand what their zoning is. So contextual zoning, people have issues with height. Can we use contextual zoning? And so what does that solve? We've done slides, you'll see, that kind of walk you through the neighborhood, looking at the buildings. How'd that building get there? Why is that allowed? Or these are the type of buildings we have here, and understanding how it fits with the zoning. Looking at preservation-based zoning versus growth-based zoning, some of the issues that come up. So what we would do in these presentations, outline the type of districts you have in the neighborhood, give you a little talk about them.
So I'm just going to flip through quickly. This is an example of a zoning map with color done by a student of Pratt, who is an urban fellow assigned to District 9. And so we'd walk you through the zoning that you have. These are actually from the Department of City Planning. They're very good stuff they put on their website for various zoning studies they've done in recent years. So we would give you a little sense of the zoning in your neighborhood and what exactly could be built. Pictures in a neighborhood. Now, if you go back and look at this, this is what's allowed, and then you look at the pictures. You know, how closely do the homes built in a neighborhood match up by what the zoning allows? So again, I'll flip through this quickly. And then again, looking at, say, building heights or floor area, different parameters that kind of help understand, well, if I have a certain zoning, why do I have tall buildings? Why don't I have tall buildings? Concept of height factor zoning and contextual zoning, we could explain that to you. This example of height factor zoning, and I'll give you some of the basic rules that go with it. So again, looking through the neighborhood. And then these are optional contextual zoning, but not mandatory contextual zoning. We'd walk you through some of the rules of that. Wide streets, that becomes a zoning issue when you don't have mandated height limits. But a developer, when you have wide streets, they have different zoning rules versus narrow streets when they want to build the contextual zoning. So again, more walking you through some of the homes that exist in the neighborhoods. Here's a detached house, yet it's in a district that allows 12-story buildings. Of course, you can't build a 12-story building in a site. That's small, but you know what? Developer wants that home. It's going to be 5 stories in the future. And it's going to go right lot line to lot line. So we'll give you a little bit about things like that. Here's an example of, again, our 6th district in the area, and building heights and floor areas, and again, tying it back to wide streets. So again, we could customize these for your neighborhoods. We'll give you some basic zoning information in terms of what is floor area and how that applies. Attic bonuses apply in a lot of southern Brooklyn for a zoning calculation. Sky exposure planes, they're in lower density districts, they're in higher density districts, so we can walk you through that. And I'm trying to do this fast so you could all get home, but I will take questions. Again, the goals of what you'd want to do to change your zoning, what do you want to solve? So preservation-based districts, a lot of them are not really mapped yet in our neighborhoods, although we've had them in a few spots of southern Brooklyn. So, for example, zones with A's and B's, sometimes with -1s, tend to be more specific. It may be, do I want to do a detached zone? I don't want to decrease the density. Maybe I even want to increase the density, but I only want detached homes, or I only want semi-detached homes. So we could go over some of the tools that accomplish that for you. So we'll show you some zones that you may not have yet that city planning has as readily available tools that you could replace. Again, here's an example. I want detached only, but I want bigger homes. Here's an example where I don't want row houses, I only want semi-detached homes. Then there's opportunities, you know, you just had a presentation about housing opportunities. So often we're going to have to upzone some of our neighborhoods, but maybe we want to do with height limits. So I laid out some zones here that in District 7 could be upzones. So here's an example of height that it's mandatory. You can't exceed 70 feet in this district. Here's an example, and this shows the model we have to date with affordable housing where it's voluntary, where the upper third, although the building isn't all affordable in the top, it gives you a sense how much extra floor area you could have with the affordable bonus. So we'll go through those programs because the districts that are voluntary today are likely to remain voluntary in the future, although there's possibilities to fix those rules. But again, some of you are in neighborhoods where you have the voluntary rules. And so that's just a little bit of some stuff we covered with District 9. We could modify this to deal with the issues of your board. And so let us know how we could work with your boards, your committees, executive board, whatever works at community boards, we'll make ourselves available. If there are questions, happy to take any.
One thing, so at the Borough Service Cabinet meeting last month, we told the district manager, some of you who are here tonight, that in the fall, we want to schedule planning workshops with each community board, whether it's with your whole board or your land use committee or zoning committees or whatever you have. As you know, the mayor's office is going to be looking to do a lot of rezonings. We want community boards to be empowered with all the information they need. So we want to work with you one by one to go over these, make these presentations, make sure your board members understand what powers they have, what their role is in the process, what their existing housing zoning rules allow for, what they could potentially get, and make sure everyone has the tools they need as these rezonings come down the pike in the next couple of years. So we'll be following up with your offices, your district managers, and the chairs in the late summer to schedule them throughout the fall. So every community board will be going through one of these workshops with us.
Just ask, what kind of time allotment would be required for that? Could it be done in the context of a committee, a land use committee meeting, 4 or 5 hours? Okay.
I mean, it's really whatever you want. We'll tailor it to you. You know, like the presentation we did for the Housing Committee of Board 9, so a little over an hour of the actual presentation, I did 40 minutes worth of questions. You know, it really will customize to the situation.
Okay. Richard, thanks you. And take full use of the information and take full use. I mean, we're blessed to really have Richard here in Borough Hall and in the borough of Brooklyn, even outside of Borough Hall's call to find out information with the wealth of knowledge that Richard has. At this time, I will open the floor for questions and comments from any member of the board or their representative. Any questions, comments? Yes, meeting 19. What time is it? 6 p.m. Okay.
We'll send that out to you in the meeting.
Anyone in the audience that's not a member of the board, if you have any questions at this time? Okay. Thank you. That concludes our scheduled board meeting. Any old business? Wait a second.
Hi again. I want to just thank everybody because the industrial zone, their funding has been reinstated with a little bit more, which is absolutely fabulous. They do a lot of great work, and they did a lot of great work in Sunset Park. And I'm just, hurrah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. 15, you had something? Motion to adjourn. Second. Are you raising it as a second? Or you, okay.
New business, Mr. Borough President?
Yes.
I'd just like to take this moment to introduce the new chair of CB1, Ms. D'Alice Fuller.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, and Dwayne is new chair of Community Board 9. Congratulations to you. Yes.
I second the motion to adjourn.
Thank you. I used to be a song.